Good morning. It sounds so simple because as we grow up, we are in some kind of relationship with different human beings. That's how life grows. But it is one of the most difficult aspects of human life because human beings are the most complex creations. And that would not be such a big problem, except that then we are not only the most complex creations, but we are incomplete. So we are also in a mode of transition. So that makes human relationships the most difficult subjects. In fact, it's easy to relate with God, find God, love God, but much more difficult to love human beings. Inherently, there are some problems with it. And what makes it worse is that nobody teaches us. We have to figure it out all by ourselves through imprints. It develops like whatever our role models, the parents, and other people whom we see, that becomes an imprint for carrying it further. But since no human relationship, as far as I'm aware of, with vast experience both of life, also sitting on this side of the table as a counselor, psychiatrist, there is no single human relationship which I can really say is really what people want to call it as a perfect or whatever it is. So I think one of the errors that we make about not only relationships but everything in life, people often want a perfect job, perfect career, and a perfect relationship, is that we believe that there are things which are perfect and we just have to enter that mythical heaven and life will be beautiful. Old time movies used to have that people loved each other, then they got married. Conveniently, they didn't show what happens thereafter, because the real story starts after that. But the important point is that everything in life is evolving. So, first thing we must understand is that life is a field of evolution and progress. And in every sphere, including relationship, there is nothing like a ready made perfect world, a ready made perfect person, ready made perfect marriage, ready made perfect child, least of all, ready made perfect parents, ready made, it doesn't exist. So, but the good news is that, it doesn't exist, but we can work towards it and we can make it as close as possible within human limits, perfect, and beyond the human limits, we can make it really something divine. So, this is the good news. And I would say the better news is that this is the good news, the possibility. And the better news is that we have to work towards it. Many people, are not very happy about this idea that it's a evolutionary world and we have to work. I wish God had made it like heaven. Everything is ready made and fixed. It would be a very boring world. And I can give you that example that why evolutionary progression is important. So there was this sage whose daughter wanted to marry the most perfect human being, most perfect. No, it was not the daughter, but he, with his mantric power, had turned a rat into a daughter. Mice, by his mantric power, changed into a human being. And when she grew up, she had come of age. So he said that, I want to get you married to somebody. And she said, well, yeah, you are a sage, get me married to the best person in the world. He said, very simple, you tell me, name it, and I'll get. So, God of fire, and it's too hot, intense. God of wind, he is too swift, he doesn't hold by my side, he rushes before I can catch up with him. So, God of water, he is all the time pouring on everybody. So, where am I? So, God of fire, too intense, it burns me, hurts me. I want him to stay away, but the fellow doesn't go away, and it's too much scorching for me. God of earth, he just remains here, he doesn't, move anywhere. So, ultimately, God of sky, too vast, too many people in his life. So ultimately, after gods, he comes to human beings, the warrior, this, that, he's unhappy. Okay, I'll try some other things. So he says, what is greater than the sun god, the highest. So he says mountain can block the sight of the sun. Okay, mountain. So will you marry a mountain? The being of the mountain? He says no, mountain also is too strong. I am a bit appalled by the mountain. So is there something stronger than the mountain? Somebody. So he says yes. Rats can dig a hole in the mountains. So she says there it is. That's what I want to marry. So the sage is so frustrated that at the end of the whole thing he tells his daughter Mushika Bhava, become the mice that the consciousness is same. So one of the big challenges of human life is that we all look-alikes in some way or the other, and all this idea gets reinforced of look-alikes. So we are all one, we are all same, and everybody khun ek hota hai, etc., etc. But there is a vast range of difference in human beings. This is something very... So, while in other species, you have just within the species, you find your match and you don't go out of the species. But in human beings, whether we like it or not, because of these evolutionary tendencies, there are already many subspecies or layers of humanity which all have the same form. One day the form will change, but there is a whole evolutionary types of humanity. And while we are consulting the almanac and the right match, etc., but the big problem is that the different human beings exist within the same skin, and we go by very external things like how the person looks and what is the outer achievement. But that's the worst way to really go together. I am sounding much like a matchmaking fellow. So let me just come to the real subject of relationship. Relationship is not only about matchmaking, and human beings have a responsibility not only of having a relationship, which typically means a man and a woman. Well, we are relating with the whole world of creation, including the gods, the titans, the animals, the earth, and plants. But for purposes of that will be too vast a subject. So I'm zeroing it on to a human relationship, and particularly there is something called, as somebody has remarked, that are man and a woman two different species? Well, that's one way to look at it, but there are two different modes of working of the same. Once we understand this, life becomes a lot more easier, because a man typically relates with the mind, and he lives in a world of ideas, whereas a woman typically relates with the heart, the feminine. It's not about man and a woman. Typically with the heart, the intuition in the heart, and she connects things of the earth to the sky. So in the ancient scriptures, it was regarded as earth and the heaven. So it's not that earth is inferior, that's not the way to look at it. But by nature, women, feminine, let me put it like that, can bind things together. Whereas the masculine elements tends to live in a world which is more ideative, not rooted right here upon earth. So this creates a little difficulty, because the way the two approach life is very, very different. This is one part which we have to understand. Second, once we understand that it's a world which is a world in transition, so at this point of time, till we have found the right ground, our relationships will share the imperfections of the life that we lead. So we cannot have a perfect world if our consciousness is imperfect. So ideally speaking, relationships should be rooted in the divine, the truth, the absolute, or the soul, at least the soul within us. But then, well, that's a far cry. There is a journey towards that. Does it mean that till then we don't have any relationship and get into a search for the divine? Well, if somebody has a calling for that, one can go like that, but that takes you away from the world. So we have to be in the world, but always remember that ultimately our task here is not to find an ideal partner and mate. That all that will happen. Our task here is to find the right basis, the ground of consciousness through which we can connect with this world. So as long as we are on shifting grounds, we are all the time on shifting grounds. We don't realize it, and that's why things change, they evolve. So let's first study this ground on which relationships are formed to understand things a little better. So there are three kinds of grounds, or three kinds of energies that operate in nature. We know that Satwik, Rajasic, and Tamasic, and all relationships have different shades and hue of that. So, what is a Tamasic relationship? Tamasic relationship is two people just live together, and together, and together, and together, and forever, but they are like two different people in their own worlds. Its typical example is the old time couple. They would, once they are bound before whatever the fire or the legal court, they will never separate, because they get habituated. It's like habit, living out of habit. And though there is nothing which they share in common, but it's a kind of arrangement. Tamasic relationship, many of the relationships which are based on physical birth antecedents, they last because of this reason. And that's why one of the things that in ancient times there used to be, it's not a very, it has its plus and minus, more minuses than pluses, was to get people married in the same whatever caste, language, custom, because just because of that you remain rooted. It doesn't matter, simply because of that commonality or a common ground, and relationships tend to get rooted. But it's counter evolutionary, because evolution is when you face the challenge of variations and differentiations. It's like, to give an example from the animal world, a pedigree which is well bred, only by the pedigree, is all right in terms of its capacities, but it's not as smart as a street dog, because street dog has grown up through the various challenges of life, through the various crosses and coming together. So they have a kind of intelligence which is very good in terms of evolutionary process. So Tamasic relationships are like that. They have a fixed routine, fixed habit. I don't want to describe it, but typical setting is that when people meet together, they have a stock, same ideas to discuss. Most of the time, Tamasic people discuss what happened today morning, and generally in this small little circuit, larger things don't interest them. Afghanistan and Iran is not their problem unless it's happening right in their mohalla. So it's a kind of a small little consciousness which is happy with food. So the typical discussion will be, when we get up in the morning, what are we going to have today for lunch? And it's surprising, it's so true. And then at lunchtime it will be what we are going to have for dinner. So then the second type of relationship which we find more common today, because society is in a great flux and new things are going to come up. So that's very Rajogun is very active today, which is a good sign, because Tamasic relationships don't have much of an evolutionary possibility within them. So Rajasic relationships are based on mutual give and take. So in that there are primarily two kinds. One is a giver, and the other person is one who returns. He takes and returns. So they are based on give and take, on mutual interchange, and these relationships can last because each one feeds. They will last if each one feeds each other's ego and the vital self. Which means the secret of these relationships is, please send beautiful good morning messages full of nice smileys, hearts, and hugs, and all those things. And if it is only one sided, it doesn't work much, because rajas tends to fade away after that. So it has to be both sides. So then the relationship tends to last. It needs a lot of compliments from one person to another. Oh, you're so good, and the other person also says. So whether they are true or not, but because the world of falsehood is like that. So what people believe, like to believe it is true, it feeds each other's ego. So as long as the ego is fed and the desired self is fed, it works very well. But nobody can keep feeding the other person's ego and desire. So after a while, these relationships tend to enter into a mode where, as Sri Aurobindo says, they come together to separate. And when they are separate, then they want to come together. So that's how the rajas operates, like playing a game of ping pong, and they can continue like that almost again ad infinitum, because and in between many things can happen. One of the problem with rajas is tamas doesn't want a change. Tamas is much more happy with status quo. So such relationships which are based on tamas, people can continue in the same mode for a long time, and it will look very nice, but actually there is no evolution in that. But in rajas, people tend to look for a change. And this change can go on to, people entering into other kinds of relationships, temporarily coming back, having various kinds of affairs and this, that, and various things happen in Rajas, because Rajas is always looking for something new. But unfortunately, its new is not the newest new, its new is the fashionable new. So it likes to change only according to what is fashionable. So it tends to enter into this world, come back, go, come back. So that's how the Rajasic relationships go. If they can sustain a certain period, all relationships will enter into this Rajasic mode in today's world. What I call as the vital zone. And if one can go through that phase of turbulence, it's a very turbulent period, especially when people are young. That's why it's not very recommended that when you're very young, get into a relationship. I mean, you can get into a relationship, but don't get into marriage. So this idea of, waiting for some time, because in youth, the Rajas is very, very active. So if you allow time, go through certain experiences of life, then you are much better equipped. As simple as that. Rajas learns like that. So that's how relationship proceeds. There is in it thrill and joy, but at the same time also there are in it many limitations. It's not a stable ground. Then there are Satwik relationships, which is the kind we hear in ancient times, where two people took a vow and they maintained that vow. Now it's very rare, because nowadays people do take vows. It's very good. It looks nice to take vows. But people don't have the inner self-discipline and the strength to keep to the vow. But that used to be a wonderful way of two people living together, not because of any other reason, but because they have taken a vow of togetherness. So many of the customs were built around like that. But all these are very inadequate and imperfect. Because ultimately what we are looking for in a relationship, if we want to put it very squarely, is a kind of miniature divinity. We are looking for somebody who perfectly understands, who is very caring, very affectionate, very loving, who can protect, who is strong, who is intellectual, and who is spiritual, and equally in the other partner. So it's like saying that we are looking for a divine, but in flesh and blood. So it's a very big, tall cry for any human being. So please don't put such conditions and demands on your partner, because he or she will break down, because it's not easy to fulfill the demands. We are all in that transitional zone. And what we can do, and that's what we should do, is till we have found something more beautiful, that we should at least have a common goal. This should be the basis of a relationship. And then we should be willing to help each other move towards that goal. And in times as today, there should be a great amount of freedom and plasticity in a relationship. The reason is that right now the evolutionary energy is at its peak. And if we don't allow that freedom and flexibility or plasticity, relationships won't work. In today's times, they won't work, because the evolutionary urge has come. And we should also be clear about it, that there's nothing like, we love things to be forever is something wonderful. But this forever is something we can say only on one ground, the ground of the soul. I'm not saying don't say forever. Say forever, try for the forever. It's something wonderful. But we must know that when two people start a journey, they have met somewhere and they have started a journey. One, if they don't have the same destination, it's very likely that sooner or later things will begin to inwardly begin to break up. And another aspect is that even if they have the same destination, if one of them evolves, I have seen this very commonly, that when people, let's say in the young age, 20s, when they are not aware of something else which is going to come their way, they come together and they really love each other, they get married, and then one of the persons suddenly, because of the evolutionary urge within, the person evolves. Evolves means takes to another leap into another dimension, usually the spiritual or a deeper, motive. And then there is a dislocation, because if one person moves ahead at a pace which the other person cannot catch up, it can create a dislocation. The only way to take care of this dislocation is that if the other person who is moving ahead waits, holds the hand and takes together, whoever, whether it's a man or a woman, doesn't matter. But that's very difficult in human consciousness. So usually it creates a dislocation. Also it requires a certain degree of receptivity on the other person. But if two people can have the same goal, that's the minimum required to really have a truly a lasting relationship. It's not that two people don't have a same goal, cannot have a beautiful relationship, they can, but then they have to bring in a power which is normally not available in human nature in its fullness, and that is the power of love. So either there should be a common goal towards which the two are moving, and of course the love is interwoven in everything, or else there should be such a power of love that love itself is like almost like the most sacred thing for a human being. In that case, yes, even if goals are very different, even if as our many of the scriptures say, some of the scriptures, certain relationships where a man was asuric and the lady was Devic kind of a lady who was very celestial in her nature, yet they stayed together and love was there between them simply because the power of love in its origin can bind darkness to the highest light. But that's not common. So till then, it's very good to use every opportunity. Use is a way of saying, not in the way that we take advantage, but yes, whatever life offers to us, use it to increase the energy and consciousness within us. And in relationship, it's the energy of love. Relationship is basically consciously recognizing the element of love. If love is not there and people relate together because of various outer reasons, looks, career, money, then obviously it's not really anything based on true. It's based on very superficiality, and very often such people lead a very double life, which is not something beautiful. It's more like an asuric kind of relationship in which they enter. But love is a bare minimum. Relationship is about love. So in a relationship, we get the opportunity to practice yoga in a way that we can harness this power of love. How? If we are fortunate and both people are wonderful together, then it's good. But if we are more fortunate and both people are not together at same page, then it is even better in a way, because we can harness the energy of love. We can bring out the true truth of love. True truth of love is to love when the person whom you love gives nothing in return. But that's going towards the higher forms of relationship. So the lower forms of relationships are based on the ego and desired self. Even the Satwik relationship is based on that. But higher forms of relationships are based on evolutionary impulsion. And their core is different. It's no more based on the ego and the desired self. It's based on the psychic being, the soul within, and its need to evolve. So in a higher form of relationship, a person continues to love even if there is no return. So what does the person gain? One grows in energy. You see, it's a principle of life that when we are faced with opposition, it's very interesting. When we are faced with opposition, then that which we are trying to seek, that energy can increase tremendously. That's why in this world there is opposition. And we often regard it as, unfortunate. Why has God planned this world like this? But any energy you can take it, energy of knowledge. You are faced with an opposition. You can't understand something which you are trying to understand. Many people will give up. They do this, for example, with Sri Aurobindo's writings. So they say it's too difficult, they give up and they go on to something which is easy. But if they continue to read, because the mind is not able to understand, by the very fact that there is an effort involved, suddenly the consciousness within the mind grows. So that's how anything which seems like a difficulty, if we take it as a challenge of life, then that power will grow within us. That's why there is so much, sometimes these challenges or oppositions in the world. So same thing applies to relationship. If we really want our relationships to really be something beautiful, at least it should be rooted in something deep within our soul. So till we have found that, the focus should be that. The focus of any relationship should be that. And it's very, very difficult, next to impossible, that both persons will have the same focus. If you have it, then you're very, very fortunate. But that was the principle behind the central fire and taking the 7 chakra around it. The purpose was, Mother says it so beautifully. She says, marriage is, now we don't use the word marriage because marriage is a dated institution. Because it became an institution, it has become dated. But two people coming together and walking the journey of life, it's one of the most fascinating events that can ever take place, without a doubt about it. But at the same time, if because in this kind of relationship there is a cry for union at every level. In no other relationship, all other relationship are that way, not so demanding. But here the demand on both is a cry for union, but a union at every level. So there are people who are seeking only physical union or a vital union. So that's more like an asuric, relationship. Whereas there are people who are hard living heart upward. There is a kind of humanity which is living, inferior humanity, which is living in passions and the physical. And when they come together, it's a union which is purely for pleasure and it doesn't last long. And true humanity, a higher humanity, begins to live in the heart, in emotions, and then in the mind, and then in the spiritual consciousness. So here, there is a seeking of union more within than outside. This is a hallmark, a difference, that there is a much more need to be understood and understand each other, to feel love for each other, and physical is just the one part of it. It has its own role in an embodied humanity. So, meaning thereby that we can either start from the physical and try to reach to the spiritual. It's very, very difficult, because it's like when we start with the physical, very soon the vital which is involved in it tends to get, either bored, or because of vital nature, it tends to turn somewhere else. I'm saying certain very uncomfortable truths, but we can't close our eyes to this fact that any relationship based on vital and physical, by its very nature, the vital in man will turn elsewhere. Because that's how it is. But still, people understood this, so they created various means. One of them was to have a social order. It was like society's pressure, religious pressure. But in today's time, because that is broken down, and there's a lot more freedom. So relationships based on vital and physical are bound to invariably go through all these kinds of problems and issues. The other is the heart and upward. There is a much greater chance. So the other way of relationship is turn from within outward. That means at least start with the heart, emotional heart. There also, if it is not based on just the form and appearance, but something deep within, like a formless essence, there is a real feeling of love in the core of the heart. Then that is something very beautiful if one can have that. So then there is intellectual companionship, what is called as a platonic relationship. But that relationship gives a joy if you live in the mind. It does not encompass the totality. Ideal is where the spiritual, psychic, intellectual, emotional, vital, physical, sensational, all these different aspects come together in a beautiful and harmonious union. Whether it's possible, well, one day it is bound to be possible, because this is part of the original plan. There is another aspect of relationship, that in this world everything is in disorder, including human beings coming together. So, while two people in ignorance start their journey together, but we don't know what is God's plan. So later on, if in one person the evolutionary impulsion begins to act, so it's quite likely that the two are going to move away, simply because that was never the original intended plan. Now when it happens with job and career, it's one thing, but when it happens with human beings, it's very painful. But it does happen. It happens simply because the original will is something else. Sri Ramakrishna put it very interestingly. He said, God laughs when a physician says that I am going to cure this person, whereas God has decided to take him away. And he also laughs when two people take a vow that we will stay together forever, whereas God has already decided that they would separate. So, this is a kind of will which operates. And you see in the life of people who have been even deeply spiritual, because suddenly, and it's very painful, because as human beings, as I said, one of the greatest joy that can exist in this kind of a union, because this kind of a union between two human beings is what comes closest to the joy that one experiences in merger with the divine. Sri Aurobindo speaks of that in Savitri, that as when a soul is merging into the infinite, that is the kind of at human level it comes closest. It's not the same thing, but it comes closest. So human beings seek it very instinctively. The joy of love, the joy of intense union, complete union in love. And when that doesn't take place, it's tremendously painful. Also because of the ego and hurt and all this is involved. So what we should do when that happens? Well, we should understand, get the lesson, move on, move forward, understand that this is life, it's nature, not get disappointed, nor rush into another. So both, there is a group of people who say, oh, life is all about it, it's all useless, and they become bairagis till they find another person. So that kind of bairagi, or they enter into a monastery and close themselves. Well, in life it's good not to make such kind of impossible things about the future. Say that, give me time to understand what goes wrong. So it's like a learning process. And second is to understand that, well, it's not that somebody else is responsible for what's happening in my life. Very often we lose that opportunity by blaming, complaining. That's very easy. Or we take another posture, forgiving. Forgiving is also the same thing. I blame you, but I forgive you. But to understand that, what is it that I need to grow up? I don't like to use the word learn, but it's something like, what is the wisdom within it? So then when we look at it like that, then things are better. And then there should be a time when there is a breakup, because it's a common problem nowadays. At least I experience means not I experience, but sitting on this side of the table, well, you experience, because nowadays it's very common. I remember as a child when I heard about divorces, it was like a shock. People, parents can get separated. Even my parents can get separated at some point of time. It was like a shock. But today it's like, oh, they have stayed together all their life. It's so wonderful. It's such a rare specimen. So the reason is because times are changing, and we as the evolutionary pressure is growing, and so everything is, we are like in that tambola, so all the things are shifting very fast. All the points that came together because of a tremendous churning are shifting very fast. During this corona period, I have seen especially too many changes, including relationships, because this is very, very fast track, fast forward movement. Who can keep pace, who can hold hand together, which hearts can stay together, all this is happening. So we must know how to deal with it. And the only way to deal with it is to understand that life is a constant movement forward. It doesn't begin with a relationship of a perfect kind, nor does it end with one. So often I ask people the same thing when that when you were a child, were you not happy? Yes, I was happy. So this person came into your life, you became happy. Now when the person goes away, can you get back to that childlike state? So this is we need to understand that we have learned to start getting happiness from somebody, and therefore we are unhappy. The reason is that there's a relationship where we become dependent on the other person. And that relationship invariably leads to unhappiness at some point of time. Because nobody can have an inexhaustible store to give. So instead of that, we should change ourselves consciously into a giver. So a giver is never unhappy. See, a giver is the one who is giving. So if something is taken away from the person, it's like you are giving. So you are always a free person. A giver is always a free person. And somebody who wants and wants and wants is always an unhappy person, because you're dependent on someone. So for a giver, the problem is that where will he get his resources from? And to get his resources from, he or she must open to the infinite, to the divine within. So in today's times, the best case scenario, till we really cross over this period of intense evolution, is for our personal needs, requirements, or whatever we may say of love, open to the divine love, and through bhakti, through adoration, and receive from the divine. Don't expect from any human being. People often say no expectation, but that's an impossibility. Somewhere you have to receive. What is expectation? You want to receive something. So you have to receive from somewhere. Otherwise, there are people who don't have this kind. I don't expect from anyone who stays single and they become very dry, they become very hard. That's not what we want in life. Love is the very fabric of existence. We want love. Love is the core of creation. It's beauty, it's ananda. But where do we receive it from? So we receive our this love from the divine. That's why the dictum is that till you have found the divine, everything else is a proviso. Don't regard it with a finality. And when you have found the divine, then let him decide what will come in your life, stay in your life, go away from your life. In any case, you are receiving from the divine. So when you turn to a human being or animals or plants, you're giving. And you're receiving inexhaustible source from the divine. So that is the best case scenario which is possible in today's times, to turn to divine, receive everything from the divine, and give it to all who are around. This can be one of the most beautiful possibilities today. If one can reach a point where there are, often people ask me that what about the soulmate? So all that I say is find the soul, the mate will come if it is destined. Don't put the cart before the horse. There will be many mates whom you will think are soulmates, but they are only for a while, multiple soulmates. So this touches upon another problem that, in today's times, unlike previous time, there is this new idea of multiple relationships. This is something new. And what does it really imply? So what it implies is that core will be one. There will be at the core somebody with whom you are meant to be, like literally a made in heaven type. So not made in heaven suffered on earth, but made in heaven replicated on earth. That's what is, every time in India marriages are after Shiv Ji's Vivah. That like the ideal couple, Shiva and Parvati, though they also quarrel at times, but they stayed together because they are focused on one action. Together they create the dance of creation. The masculine and the feminine element perfectly tuned to each other. But so that's where one should understand that if one can find the soul and there is somebody with whom one can be at the core, then all around there will be things like concentric circles. So multiple relation can be understood in a wrong way that, well, I can just be around with this and that and different people together at the same level, like multiple vital partners. That's not what it means. That's the Asuric way of understanding multiplicity. But the Daivik way is that at the core there will be one. Maybe nobody knows about it. Maybe there is none yet. But core will be one which is the partner with whom Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, hand in hand face the question life. So that's the core. Now around the core, there will be concentric circles. So there are people who are near, all around, close at different levels. Here, we can understand it because there are different aspects of ourselves. So each relationship is like a mirror. The more complex we are, and according to Indian thought, there are some 365 aspects of our personality. So each one represents some aspect of our personality. And sometimes we have very contradictory elements. Like for instance, a person may have very simple aspect of the personality. Another aspect may be extremely complex intellectually. There are people who are very simple, childlike at heart, but extremely complex their mind can operate. Then there are people who can be very ascetic in one part of their being. But at the same time, they have this, so Shiva and Krishna together, the more complex we become. So it's very difficult to have, so there are different people, so they will find somebody who is very simple and with whom they are extremely, if I may use a modern term, gelling at one level. Whereas there are others with whom they gel at a very different level. But they are not the core. Core will be one. If you have not found one, keep it empty. Let the chamber wait. So rather than... and then you will have the whole world. That's why till one has found that, and even after we have found that, the best relation that we can have in today's times is friendship. So friendship is a wonderful word. Sometimes it can conjure all kinds of things. I'm not speaking of that. But genuine healthy friendship. So what's friendship about? Each friend is some aspect or the other of ourselves. We can make this study and we'll find it. That friend A, some aspect. There are people with whom we love to discuss films. There are others with whom we love to discuss, very abstract ideas. There are still others with whom we can discuss political events. There are still others with whom we can discuss, very personal issues of life. So the more complex we become, the more this many-sidedness tends to come up, adding to the problem of today's time. Because as humanity climbs up the ladder, it is bound to become more and more complex. It will gather many elements of creation, and they will all begin to manifest, and each will relate with something or the other, or someone or the other. So we have to accept this, that though there will be a person at the core, there will be many friends. This is how one has to accept it. And we see this happening already today. It's the way forward. And so a lot of trust will be required in a relationship, because the moment you bring in the element of friends, especially we are still living in that, a lady having friends, what kind of friend, how can you be friends with a man? But that's how it is, that life is unfolding itself with many aspects, having many persons coming together, but core will be one. Then there'll be people who are very far, so I can take it like that. There are people who are close to your inner core. For instance, when we take to a spiritual life, whether it be, let's say, Buddhism, or it's not about religion, it's about a path. So there will be people who will be, with whom you can be your deepest self, with whom you feel connected at a level which is nothing to do with any externalities. Everybody experiences that. Then there are others whom you meet and you can discuss very interesting things. Then there are others with whom you just have a work like colleagues. You are working together. So in this way, there will be expanding concentric circles with one at the core. So we must find that, but that is only possible if we have found a core. What is the sign that somebody is really at the core? The person will have the same aspiration. The core is always the same. But that aspiration in one person takes one root in the other person. That's how they are complementaries. Same aspiration. Now aspiration, of course, not ambition, but deep inside. So even on a same spiritual path, the aspiration may be different. So very often people say, okay, we'll marry somebody who is on the same path, from the same fold. It doesn't work like that. Because even on the same path, aspiration may be very different. So it's that aspiration which marks a person, that core faith, core aspiration. And we should feel it within ourselves and feel it in another person, if at all. But please don't look for it. The worst kind of thing, most dangerous in life, is to look for a soulmate and look for the soul and a friend. That's wonderful. And if you're destined to be together, life will offer that. Take it, be sincere, try to make it beautiful, increase the energy of love, go as far as it takes us. If it takes us very far, wonderful. If it doesn't take us very far, understand that it's not because of that person or this person. It's because such is the nature of life as of today. And we should not lose hope, but always understand that things can become better. Let's make it better. At least within us we can make things better. So that's the way forward for humanity as of today. Man is still not complete, and there's something waiting beyond man. So we are all beings of transition, and if we are beings of transition, then whatever we find in life, including a person, will also be a person in transition. Just remember that. Life will be beautiful. Otherwise, a lot of pain and suffering awaits us. To close it, a perfect person who can love a human being perfectly is only possible when a person has loved God and received His love. It's impossible, literally impossible, because we don't know what is love. As Shelley has put it so beautifully, one word most profaned. We don't know what is love. We use the word love. And the basis of relationship is love. We don't know what is love. Until we have tasted that love, found that love, received the touch of that love, we really cannot love, because we use words like unconditional love, but in Savitri there is a line, one who can love without return for love. Only the divine can do so. And those who have grown into the likeness of the divine through loving the divine. Any questions?
So I do have a question, but before that I wanted to share that while I was listening to you, I ended up drawing two pictures, like coloring. And so the one is concentric hearts, and the center I ended up making it different color, like a more of a orangish and yellowish color, and then I expanded it into another image came from there. Uh, like the sun in my heart. That's the name that came to me. So it just opened up like that. And while I could listen to you, I could almost relate with what you were talking about, the core and the aspirations and how they can also be different. Can you also give an example of it, like, for me to understand it?
So you see examples now, is there a perfect relationship as of now? I won't venture to say that there is any example which I can see, because everything is in the making. But what I can say, the only example that comes to my mind ever is Sri Aurobindo's own life. So on one side we have his, he was married, and his relationship with Mrilani Devi, where we can see that obviously she was very far from sharing his aspiration, and yet we see the tremendous love and compassion with which he poured his love on her. So much so that he wrote at one of the places that where I have loved once, I cease not from loving. So that's one kind of relationship where the person is not able to follow, whereas the other person is climbing towards greater and greater heights. Yet the person does not abandon. This is something very, very, very beautiful. For me personally, it has been one of the most inspiring things about Sri Aurobindo, that he at no point abandoned his wife. At no point. People have this misconception that he left his wife. No, he was on his trail, but never abandoned. She received so much so that, as the story goes, that even when she, now this of course the mystic lore, when she came back in her next life, Sri Aurobindo gave her a very special, both faculty and a kind of treatment. And both mother and Sri Aurobindo knew that she is, was his wife in the previous, as Mrilani Devi. So that's something which personally I found very inspiring. On the other hand, this was not what is, where there is a perfect partner, if one may say so. Now that's where we see Sri Aurobindo and the mother. If we read through the literature, in 1912 there is a letter of Sri Aurobindo. Mother has not yet come and met Sri Aurobindo. In 1912 there is a letter of Sri Aurobindo to Motilal Roy, and around the same time mother is speaking about what she plans to do for earth. What is the agenda? And there is such a commonality and similarity that one is surprised. They are both pursuing the same path but in their own way, and perfectly, like, we see Sri Aurobindo moving through the mind upward and upward. The mind becomes silence and going, whereas the mother, right from the heart, if we read the mother's prayers and meditations and we read the life divine from Sri Aurobindo, we'll see both are arriving at the same point, the same synthesis they are seeking, but through very different routes. And what a perfect relationship where, she says that without him I exist not, and without me he is unmanifest. So that ideal relationship is the relationship of Ishvara and Shakti, or Purusha and Prakriti. Whereas what is the role of the Purusha or the Ishvara? He brings all the, he's the conceptive mind. He throws like a seed, at the physical level. This is the symbol of the offspring. The Purusha casts the seeds into the womb of Prakriti. The Prakriti takes those seeds and brings it out in a form of manifold world. So this is the ideal relation where at the deepest level, so we see that all the dreams of Sri Aurobindo, the mother received them, and then she created a whole world beyond worlds, starting with the ashram, society, Auroville and all these places where she received those seeds, and they were sprout forth. So that's what we see at the physical level happening in a ordinary life, that the man gives the seed and the lady conceives, and then the offspring and everything else is her. So this is how, but it is the man is supposed to bring those seeds. So that's where his tapasya is towards breaking barriers of thought, ideas, climb through the staircase of ideas and discover that which is hidden. And the Prakriti or the Shakti, though she also can break the barrier, but it's a self-chosen task where she receives it and then she sprouts it. So it's very beautifully there in, even Shiva and Parvati's relationship, where both are capable of, breaking the barrier. But when they are playing the game of dice, which is actually the game of fate, so the understanding is that Shiva will always know what is going to come, because in the game of dice, he's Shiva, so he knows. So Parvati says, I can also know, but I will put a veil upon myself. So I'll not know. I'll play as if I don't know the future because I'll veil myself. But this makes the game very unbalanced. So he says, but the thing is, the rules I will decide. So it's very interesting that he knows the future and she doesn't know the future. But she decides the rule and the Purusha follows. So that's what we see even in the ashram life, that Sri Aurobindo in that sense was like a child. Whenever the mother got, she took all the arrangements and Sri Aurobindo would not interfere with that. So probably from there comes the word of Grahasti and Grahini, because she arranges the entire household. Everything was in her hands. But for her own self, she depended fully on him. All her love for the Lord and given back to him. And from his side, everything was poured to the mother, and from the mother, it went into all the concentric circles. So that's how I conceive that's the highest relationship. Probably that's the line that humanity has to advance. That's what I can think of. Or, I mean, it has been my ideal. So in his life, we see both of them. On one side, a married relationship, which is obviously imperfect, yet we see how Sri Aurobindo, a person who is aspiring towards his spiritual life, deals with it. And the other side, we see that, he has a person who is perfect, meant to be, the one together, one in two. As he said, that we are one but in two bodies. Now, that's the perfect kind of relationship. One has to be a yogi or especially blessed or gifted by the grace to have even a little glimpse of that in our earthly life. Maybe people are there who have it. I mean, all of us glimpse such things in our most beautiful moments, but because our human nature is still untransformed, unlike Mother and Sri Aurobindo, where there was a perfect adaptation. Whatever Mother said, Sri Aurobindo never would contradict her. If somebody came and told her that, Mother has said so, Sri Aurobindo's reply was, oh, is it? That's the end of the story. So, but at the same time, if somebody told that Sri Aurobindo has said so, Mother would never contradict. It was such a beautiful, perfect harmony where there was no scope of, debate, discussion, the intellectual way, because there was a perfect union at the deepest planes and the highest planes. And the nature was so transformed. It was not at all, there was no ego mode operating, no desire mode, what I have to get and what you will get. So this is the perfect way, if and man should stand back. And I think that's the way the times are changing. More and more I see, even in animal creation at the most ordinary level, if I see, what does the male do? In most of the cases, you will see that male looks a little more beautiful. And the moment the feminine of a species conceives, all the rest is her job. And today we see the similar thing which is happening, that actually a woman runs everything. Though men are still working. I don't know what they do with their money, but the woman organizes, she works, she takes care of the home, she takes care of the children, and everything else she organizes, like a super organization. Some women feel bad about it, but I tell them that, look, when they say that I have to do everything, I say, yeah, because you are more capable and the divine trusts you much more. Because, they are excellent in shopping, whether it's Amazon or actual this thing. And they are excellent in house making. I have all, respect. As a man, I can tell you that one of the best ways to treat women is that each one is an aspect of Shakti. She is a Devi. So for every man, I recommend, please touch the feet. And, and I mean it, that treat her as Devi. Even if she is in anger, she is Kali or Durga. Don't get into a fight. If she is benevolent, with a beatific smile, she is Lakshmi. Treat her with respect, regardless of anything. This is one of the ways Swami Vivekananda said this is the highest tantra. So for men, it's a wonderful opportunity to treat women as Devis. So all this is within our own realm. You see, Sri Ramakrishna actually did that. No, that's another example of a close to perfect relationship. Sri Ramakrishna was living in those realms, and he would give talks. But the entire mission was organized by Sharda Devi. And when they got married, he put himself at her feet and literally said, "You want to be the mother of one child, few children, or the mother of the world?" And she said, "Mother of the worlds." So this is perfect. But still, this is still confined to the spiritual domain. But that is another relationship which comes close. There have been instances like that in the history of mankind. But the two that comes closest to me are these. Yeah.
Doctor, there is a question saying, how does this framework explain the inequality in gender that we experience in society? So it's closely related.
Okay, so this is a very good question. So the inequality in gender. First thing I must say that this was world over. So it's not only unique to India. It was world over. Look at the history. When did women get their voting rights? And this whole idea of Victorian morality and the kind of dresses, if you see, this was world over. And in Indian context, I can say why it came. First of all, it should not be there. Let me make it very clear. But it came because in India, at least, there has been, and in general in the world, there has been an approach towards the divine as a masculine side. You see, entire Vedanta is turned toward the Purusha. And though in India there has been at least the worship of the feminine in Tantra, yet in real life she has been neglected. Still, the whole society was framed towards the Purusha side, leaning towards that. And men, of course, they have the physicals. The only thing in which men, I may say, are one up than a woman, though they are going to fast lose it now with the Olympics and all that, we can see that, was the physical strength. I'm sorry to say, but in every other sphere, you see, look at matters of the heart, intellect, she was not given the opportunity. But give a woman an opportunity and she excels. And what is important is she brings beautifully the qualities of the head and the heart. Still, the society men seized power. You see what's happening in Afghanistan now. Men seized power, and then because of the physical brute strength. So this brute strength which was there when we were still of the animal make, it's a reminiscent of that life. That you have the brute strength and you make them slaves. But barring this aspect, and times are changing now world over, even in a place, again I take the same event, even in a place like Afghanistan, for the first time we hear that there are protests, and even women are taking up the challenge that no, we don't accept this kind of slavery. So this is a sign that the Shakti is awakening. So this is the reason, and it should not be there. Gender inequality is, of course, contradicts all deeper spiritual truths. At the same time, gender equality does not mean the way the West understands it. Gender equality doesn't mean that, men can smoke and drink, so I also smoke and drink. So, men can go to pubs and, can be in, tight pants, so I'll also wear tight pants. I'm not saying it is right or wrong, but I'm saying gender equality is not following the worst in the other person. This is the worst of a human being. Whether a man does it or a woman does it, it's the same thing. So, gender equality means that both have equal opportunities to bring out their best. Whether in the field of work, whether in the field of education, whether in the spiritual field, any field for that matter. Both must be equal in terms of opportunities and everything else to bring out their own strength. So if a woman wants to study, to take a common example, she must be given all the opportunities. Not that you are a woman, you have to be a homemaker, so you can't. That's gender inequality. But gender equality doesn't mean that, okay, we both are cool people, we, smoke ganja together. Now, that's the Asuric way of understanding equality. I often tell this, that why you want to imitate the worst of a human being. This is the worst in a man, to, live life like this, like an animal. True equality is the equality be as the God. So that's what I would suggest. It's and this inequality, I must say, because there is a lot of tendency to portray that as if it was only in India. It was all over the world. Just like what we call as a caste system existed all over the world in one form or the other. In fact, it still exists. So we must understand gender. Look at the voting rights in America, in England, in France. Look at the way what happened to Joan of Arc. People won't follow her leading because she's a man, she's a woman. In India, at least we, people still listen to Jhansi Ki Rani, and we have an example of Kekai, going to the war But Joan of Arc, she had to face the opposition because she's a woman. And she chopped off her ears because, her hair, because people would not accept the leading from a woman. So this was very unfortunate happening all over the world. And as I said, times are changing. So let's celebrate this change of shifting toward gender equality. It's happening on its own because of a new consciousness. It's not happening because of activism. It's happening because there is a shift of the balance of power all over the world, because there is a new consciousness which is operating, which is informing the hearts of men. When in a stronghold of Taliban, when women stand up and say that we want our rights, is it activism or it is a greater power that is moving their hearts and making them speak? So it is bound to happen, and the sooner women and men both understand, the better it is, especially men. Because otherwise they will stand on the wrong side of history. If men try to, now suppress a woman and her urge to grow, they are standing on the wrong side of history. They are bound to lose the game. So that's how I would put it. I mean, no justification for inequality. Understanding, yes. Also that it was a universal phenomena, which is unfortunate. But times are changing and we must celebrate that. Yeah. I'll give you a small interesting anecdote with regard to, just one small little anecdote with regard to this, times are changing. In 1928, there was a lady called Jaya Devi. She came to meet Sri Aurobindo. So, very difficult to come. That time, a woman couldn't even travel if she was not married. But somehow, she managed to get money. Still, there are very regressive elements of society. And I'm saying that, openly that it's time that people change. But she had, and one of the things which I always advise women is, please become economically self-dependent. It's very important in today's time that they become economically independent, because if they are not, then there is a problem. So, this lady came and one day she tells Sri Aurobindo, because she has to go back, she says, I want to ask a boon from you. So he says, what? She says, please don't make me a woman in next life. And then Sri Aurobindo smiled. She says, do you have any idea how much problem a woman has to face just to come and meet you? What opposition and what challenges I had to face? 1928. So Sri Aurobindo says, don't worry, the world is changing in such a way, the world will change in such a way that not only you, but all over the condition of women is bound to change. So he had seen to it in that very time, and that's why one of the actions of Sri Aurobindo to put the mother in the forefront, and she made women do march past and everything. And when for the first time in Pondicherry, a boy and a girl from the ashram, they were walking together. There's a whole march past was going on, and I think it was Laiddi and Abhay Singh, and they were holding the flag and doing the march past. There were people who threw stones during the practice, and when mother was informed about it, she said, completely ignore them and continue with it. So she was breaking the molds of the past and opening the doors to the future. Among the many new things that Sri Aurobindo and the mother initiated, one of them is this: not only a woman gender equality, but placing the woman where she should be, right in the forefront of the human quest. Yeah. But they said that there is a truth of the feminine and the masculine. So it's not like it is going to vanish, but it will become where what it should be, like the gods, like Ishvara and Shakti, like Purusha and Prakriti. It will become like that. Yes.
Yeah, hi sir. So it was a very detailed talk. So my question around talks around the romanticizing of love or relationship we have done as a generation. So in our generation, we have romanticized the idea of love, because psychologically from our childhood we are taught about Shiva and Shakti, Rama and Sita, all our movies, everything is there. So my question is regarding that: is it necessary for our psychic being, in terms of psychic being, I'm saying that you also said there is a perfect relationship which you saw for some people like Sir Aurobindo or something. Is there and when you say something perfect, as a human being, our tendency will be to go for that. That is actually, at least my understanding, that if somebody tells me that there is a perfect relationship, I will go and search for that. So my question is that, is there something like we should the relationship part on a for a psychic being which is needed, and how they are connected, the relationship and the psychic being.
Yeah, this is a very, very beautiful practical question. So let me put it like that. One way is to say that since the ideal doesn't exist, don't place it before man. Now, that I feel is a bit of a problem, because then means that we accept a status quo that life will be imperfect. So, ideals should be there. There is an ideal towards which we strive. But at the same time, we must know that ideal cannot be fulfilled by a romanticization about it, by wishful thinking, by imagination and fantasizing about it. Yet, in the provident scheme of things, they are allowed. You see, why romanticization holds still, a great appeal to the human being, because it is like, telling us about a possibility. The mistake is that to believe that just by romanticizing we can create. Certainly not. It hurts to realize that by wishful thinking, by imagination, by singing songs together, exchanging very beautiful messages, we can't build a relationship on those grounds. But romanticization is the first impulse within an animal humanity to dream of something which is beautiful. And the dream should be kept alive, but along with the dream, there should be the path which is shown. Now, there are two ways people can proceed towards it. One is that they find first the spirit, and then they think about whatever else. This is one valid path. Like in Shankaracharya's life, the story is like that he went. Shivoham, Shivoham. And then when he discovered what is that feminine and the love, he speaks about, Bhavani Ashtakam. Nirvana ka Ashtakam changes into Bhavani Ashtakam. How does it happen? When in his debate with Mandan Mishra, then his wife says, you know so much about Brahman, but do you know what it means, a man-woman relationship? Now one may wonder, what is about man-woman relationship? Because everything in this creation has some truth somewhere in the absolute. So there is a truth. And he says, yes, I don't know, but give me time. So as the story goes, that he actually, I believe it's true. I don't believe it's just a fable. So he went in, because it's possible. So he went into a state of deep meditation, trance, and people were guarding his body. When he came out and saw a king who was dying, and he entered the body of the king, for 1 month had a conjugal relationship with his wife, understood what it means. There is something you gain, something you learn, and then he comes back and speaks about it. So one way is that you discover first that and then come back, if you can. There are many who won't come back. On the other hand, the other way is that come together, and like everything else in life, we carry the world together. So one of them is relationships, and we go together, we tune, we find a deeper basis. The problem with the latter is only that means one will go through pain and suffering. So those who choose the path that we first find the divine, then we speak about relationship. They avoid that pain, because human relationships are a deep source of pain. Whereas the other kind who choose, it's like, I leave the world, first find God, then I come back to the world. The problem in this is very good, because you don't go through the various challenges, and you go into search of God. But the problem is, when we come back to the world, we don't know how well we'll be equipped to deal with it. It's two types of temperament, and both are valid. Each one has to feel for oneself. The other is where you go with the world, including relationships. Now, this is a much more challenging and much more complex and difficult path, without a doubt about it. But at the same time, it's much more fulfilling at the end of it, because you have gone through all the stages and steps. To each his own. Both are valid. Sri Aurobindo in one of his letters clarifies it to Dilip Kumar Roy, that some like to first find the divine and then get into it. Others go together and carry that. It's a more difficult journey, but to each his own. But having said that, this aspect of romanticization, it's not just romanticization. There is a truth in it. That's precisely what both Sri Aurobindo and the mother say, that there is a truth in the relationship of the feminine and the masculine. Now, this truth, if it is a truth, it cannot be completely wiped out of existence. A pure Vedantic approach wipes it out. And then it creates the problem of inequality paradoxically. Because there is only one, that one is the Purusha ultimate. So, the moment a typical Vedantic follower or the person who moves along those lines meets a woman, his tendency is that because a woman is operating, she's a feminine, she operates in a very different way. So the tendency is sees an obstacle, sees a snare, because you want to escape from all Prakriti and enter into that state of, absolute. So one regards her as a snare. But she's not a snare. She is actually making you more perfect. That's what is there in the story of Shiva and Parvati, as you were mentioning. So the story goes that one of the rishis, when Shiva gets married, he feels that he has had a downfall. And Shiva understands. So he and Parvati one day come together to give a, sermon. And this rishi bows to Shiva, but not to Parvati. So Shiva points out that, she's the Shakti, why don't you also do pranam? He says, no, it's not necessary. Shiva is full in his own right. And then Mother Parvati at some point says, oh, I see, you don't want Prakriti, so I withdraw myself from you. And he collapses. So it's not only about man and woman, it's about the feminine and the masculine element which are there as part of creation. They are interwoven in the very fabric of life. And even if there was not a single story from any of the mythology and no romanticization, yet this truth will remain because it's supported by a deep truth. And that's why we see in the Western world, where is this all this mythology? But has not people like, Shelley, Keats and many others, they've, romanticized a kind of ideal state where a man and a woman are together. Now, because it's an eternal truth, it will remain as an aspiration within man. So it's better that we confront it, understand it, and move towards it. Otherwise, we'll always be on unsure grounds when it comes to this area. Like those, as I said, a group of seekers who regard a woman as snare. And therefore, they become very ekras and sometimes niras, more often niras than ekras. Whereas love brings ananda, love brings joy. Love is not something to be shunned. It is to be purified. It is to be refined. It is to be liberated from its lower forms. It is to be divinized. So this is how, I look at it. But yes, if somebody wants to move without any of these concepts towards a blank someone out there, it's perfectly fine, valid. Yeah, both are valid. Yeah. Yes. Something.
I think Alokda will take one last question.
Yes.
With the changing time, men and women are more evolved and capable of doing many things.
Yes.
And they bring a child upon earth who needs complete attention, care of both the parents, or at least of the mother at early years. What will you suggest to them?
So it's first of all to understand that bringing a child into existence is one of the highest ever, experiences that a human being can have. And I must tell you, being a man, I lament this that, I understand that there are many difficulties in a woman's life, but childbirth is an experience that man cannot have. And it is something amazing. I mean, from all the accounts that I have heard. Having said that, what we have to understand is that just like a relationship has to be a conscious process, childbirth and child upbringing has to be also a conscious process. So whatever activity we undertake, so on childbirth, there is so much, it should not be just an unconscious process that two people come together, they love each other and, then they have a baby in the womb. It should not be like that. It should be a conscious conception. And it's a huge subject, so I'm just touching on the key things. First of all, it should be conscious conception. Now, when we have a child, the conception is, what my child would be. So we transmit the shadow and the ambitions and desires into the child. We should leave the child free to explore and help the child to grow on his own journey. And yet, there is a work which we have to do. So, child is like a seed which is coming up. The seed doesn't know that, animals can eat it, or, it has to be fenced when it is very small, till it has taken roots, till it has grown up. All the strong winds can, drive it away. The soil which is very hard will not keep the seed proper. So the child is essentially a spiritual being who has come to us. So the task is a lot to make sure that that seed, the divine seed, which is on its journey in a human body, develops. So we have to provide an atmosphere of love, of peace, which is far more important than anything else. Rather than giving gyan, then of course one has to see child is growing towards consciousness. So as I said, to make sure that animals don't eat away the child, so there are certain fences which have to be slowly removed. It should not be done as a there's certainly the punishment has no role at all, but through education, through learning, through appealing to the best in a child. So when children have certain tendencies to appeal to their own best, what do you feel about it? And most children, if they are allowed to consult their heart, they understand, they feel it correctly. If we don't corrupt that. And the worst is to transmit our own ambitions and desires into the child. Certainly not. Child must discover one's own self. And at the end, to set the child always free, not carry this burden. Oh, the child, when he grows up, he has to look after the parents. Why? We don't bring a child as a budhape ki lathi. And thankfully, today we don't need. So, after a certain point, the child must be free to explore the world. Of course, if we have brought up a child well, there has been love involved, and obviously, there will be a love and togetherness. But we should not start becoming dependent on the child and burden him because he has to move into the future. Children are always moving into the future. So this idea that we must bind them to the past is not a very, very good idea. Essence of the past, yes. Spirit of the past, yes. But not necessarily the forms. So what is important is, let's say in a religious setup, that's not that do this vrat, do this puja, do this upvas. But yes, that there is a divine source of all things, and let the child discover in one's own way. So that's how, in a very, very, very brief thing, because it's a very vast subject. So yes, it's a beautiful thing, and but nowadays something very beautiful which I am noticing is the tendency of certain couple not to have a child, which is very interesting. So that is also very beautiful because they want to be together on the trail of a higher creation. They are conscious couples and they want toward that. Now, there are others who don't have a child because they want to have fun. So, I'm not speaking of that. But it's not mandatory anymore to have a child. Previously, if you didn't have a child, it was like everybody is asking you, "Bachcha kyun nahi hua? Bachcha kyun nahi hua?" As if the only goal of life is to have children. Thankfully, that has gone. But if one has a child, it should be brought up with utmost care and love that one can give. Both of them have to do. But mothers have a far greater role because the child is so intimately connected with the mother that the mother's consciousness affects the child very fast, right from the womb. So from the womb, the state of the mother affects the child. But who has to ensure that the mother's state is beautiful? The man has to do it. If he is not able to give love, if he is not able to, give time and energy, then what will be the state of the lady? I'm talking of an average state. She'll be in a state of depression, unhappiness, anxiety. That will affect the child. So while the man is not directly involved in the child rearing, his involvement is there to make sure that the lady, she is feels so much loved, cared and protected that she says, okay, fine, wonderful. And then she can transmit it to the child. So both come together in this way.
That's all for today. Thank you very much, Alokda, for such a beautiful and insightful discussion and talk. Thanks for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We'll end with your
Thank you.
end with a minute of silence. And